Hello, workers and friends. Welcome back to Working Class Revolts. Um, I'm Dust James, the Marxist-Leninist truck driver out of the U.S., and I'm here with my good co-host, Boilermaker by trade, union organizer, Comrade David Fox. How are things down under today?
Oh, very good. Thank you. Very good.
All right, on man, and we're very honored to have with us another Australian, also a fellow truck driver, and also involved with the labor movement, Comrade Helen Whooley. How are you today?
Oh, I'm great. I'm great, Dust. It's an absolutely beautiful winter's morning here. Absolutely beautiful, which is unusual for Melbourne. Melbourne has normally some pretty awful weather, but it is superb.
Well, right on. So this is a study meeting, and we're going to be reading from We Are City Builders, the Center for Political Innovation Educational Manual, available on Amazon, also available at bulk rate if you want to contact Caleb Moppin at calebmoppin@gmail.com. This is meant to for you to buy. You can buy it wholesale from Caleb directly and have studies on scientific socialism in your workplace, in your community. Get a few friends together, have it, IRL, or do what we're doing here, broadcast it online. Just get, scientific socialism to the masses. That's what we're about. That's what we're doing. Today, we're going to be reading and discussing Proletarians and Communists by Karl Marx from 1848. Anybody following along at home, if they have the study manual, we're going to be starting on page 141. 141. Okay. You guys want to get right into it, or do either of you guys have any introductory comments?
I think let's get straight into it. Yeah.
Okay, we'll get right into the reading.
Right.
I'll start off. In what relation do the communists stand to the proletarians as a whole? The communists do not form a separate party opposed to the other working class parties. They have no interests separate and apart from those of the proletariat as a whole. They do not set up any sectarian principles of their own by which to shape and mold the proletarian movement. The communists are distinguished from the other working class parties by this only one. In the national struggle of the proletarians of different countries, they point out and bring to the front the common interests of the entire proletariat, independently of all nationality. In the various stages of development which the struggle of the working class against the bourgeoisie has to pass through, they always and everywhere present the interests of the movement as a whole. Comrade Fox, you continue.
Yep. The communists, therefore, are on the one hand practically the most advanced and resolute section of the working class parties of every country, that section which pushes forward all others. On the other hand, theoretically, they have over the great mass of the proletariat the advantage of clearly understanding the line of march, the conditions, the ultimate general results of the proletarian movement. The immediate aim of the communists is the same of that of all other proletarian parties: formation of the proletariat into a class, overthrow the bourgeois supremacy, conquest of political power by the proletariat. Helen.
The theoretical conclusions of the communists are in no way based on ideas or principles that have been invented or discovered by this or that would-be universal reformer. They merely express in general terms actual relations springing from an existing class struggle, from a historical movement going on under our very eyes. The abolition of existing property relations is not at all a distinctive feature of communism. All property relations in the past have continually been subject to historical change consequent upon the change in historical conditions. The French Revolution, for example, abolished feudal property in favor of bourgeois property. The distinguishing feature of communism is not the abolition of property generally, but the abolition of bourgeois property. But modern bourgeois private property is the final and most complete expression of the system of producing and appropriating products that is based on class antagonism, on the exploitation of the many by the few.
In this sense, the theory of the communists may be summed up in the single sentence: abolition of private property. We communists have been reproached with the desire of abolishing the right of personally acquiring property as the fruit of a man's own labor, which property is alleged to be the groundwork of all personal freedom, activity, and independence. Hard-won, self-acquired, self-earned property. Do you mean the property of petty artisan or small peasant, a form of property that precede the bourgeois form? This is no need to abolish that. The development of industry has, to a great extent, already destroyed it, and is still destroying it daily.
Or do you mean the modern bourgeois private property? But does wage labour create any property for the labourer? Not a bit. It creates capital. That is, the kind of property which exploits wage labour, and which cannot increase except upon condition of begetting a new supply of wage labour for fresh exploitation. Property, in its present form, is based on the antagonism of capital and wage labour. Let us examine both sides of the antagonism. To be a capitalist is to have not only a pure personal, I'll start again. To be a capitalist is to have not only a purely personal but a social status in production. Capital is a collective product, and only by the united action of many members, nay, in the last result, only by the united action of all members of society, can it be set in motion. Capital is therefore not only personal, it is a social power. When therefore capital is converted into common property, into the property of all members of society, personal property is not thereby transformed into social property. It is only the social character of the property that is changed. It loses its class character.
Let us now take the wage labour. The average price of wage labour is the minimum wage. That is, that quantum of the means of subsistence which is absolutely requisite to keep the labour in bare existence as a labourer. What therefore the wage labourer appropriates by means of his labour merely suffices to prolong and reproduce a bare existence. We by no means intend to abolish this personal appropriation of the products of labour, an appropriation that is made for the maintenance and reproduction of human life, and that leaves no surplus wherewith to command the labour of others. All that we want to do away with is the miserable character of this appropriation, under which the labourer lives merely to increase capital, and is allowed to live only insofar as the interest of the ruling class requires it. In bourgeois society, living labour is but a means to increase accumulated labour. In communist society, accumulated labour is but a means to widen, to enrich, to promote the existence of the labourer. In bourgeois society, therefore, the past dominates the present. In communist society, the present dominates the past. In bourgeois society, capital is independent and is individuality, while the living person is dependent and has no individuality. And the abolition of this state of things is called by the bourgeoisie abolition of individuality and freedom, and rightly so. The abolition of bourgeois individuality, bourgeois independence, and bourgeois freedom it is undoubtedly aimed at.
By freedom is meant under the present bourgeois conditions of production, free trade, free selling and buying. But if selling and buying disappears, free selling and buying disappears also. This talk about free selling and buying and all the other, quote, brave words, unquote, of our bourgeois about freedom in general have a meaning, if any, only in contrast with restricted selling and buying with the fettered traders of the Middle Ages, but have no meaning when opposed to the communist abolition of buying and selling, of bourgeois conditions of production, and of bourgeoisie itself.
You are horrified at our intending to do away with private property. But in your existing society, private property is already done away with for 9/10 of the population. Its existence for the few is solely due to its non-existence in the hands of those 9/10. You reproach us, therefore, with intending to do away with a form of property, the necessary condition for whose existence is the non-existence of any property by the immense majority of society. In one word, you reproach us with intending to do away with your property. Precisely so. That is just what we intend. From the moment when labour can no longer be converted into capital, money, or rent into a social power capable of being monopolised, that is, from the moment when individual property can no longer be transformed into bourgeois property, into capital, from that moment, you say individuality vanishes.
You must therefore confess that by individual, you mean no other person than the bourgeois, than the middle class owner of property. This person must indeed be swept out of the way and made impossible. Communism deprives no man of the power to appropriate products of society. All that it does is to deprive him of the power to subjugate the labour of others by means of such appropriations. It has been objected that upon the abolition of private property, all work will cease and universal laziness will overtake us. According to this, bourgeois society ought to long ago have gone to the dogs through sheer idleness. For those of its members who work acquire nothing, and those who acquire anything do not work. The whole of this objection is but another expression of the tautology. There can no longer be any wage labour when there is no longer any capital.
All objections urged against the communistic mode of producing and appropriating material products have in the same way been urged against the communistic mode of production and appropriating intellectual products. Just as to the bourgeois, the disappearance of class property is the disappearance of production itself. So the disappearance of class culture is to him identical with the disappearance of all culture. The culture, the loss of which he laments, is for the enormous majority a mere training to act as a machine.
But don't wrangle with us so long as you apply to our intended abolition of bourgeois property, the standard of your bourgeois nations of freedom, culture, law, etc. Your ideas are but the outgrowth of the conditions of your bourgeois production and bourgeois property, just as your jurisprudence is but the will of your class made into a law for all, a will whose essential character and direction are determined by the economical conditions of existence of your class. The selfish misconception that induces you to transform into eternal laws of nature and of reason the social forms springing from your present mode of production and form of property, historical relations that rise and disappear in the progress of production. This misconception you share with every ruling class that has preceded you. What you see clearly in the case of ancient property, what you admit in the case of feudal property, you are, of course, forbidden to admit in the case of your own bourgeois form of property.
Abolition of the family. Even the most radical flare-up at this infamous proposal of the communists. Even the most radical flare-up at this infamous proposal of the communists. On what foundation is the present family, the bourgeois family, based? On capital, on private gain. In its completely developed form, this family exists only among the bourgeoisie. But this state of things finds its complement in the practical absence of the family among the proletarians and in public prostitution. The bourgeois family will vanish as a matter of course when its complement vanishes, and both will vanish with the vanishing of capital. Do you charge us with wanting to stop the exploitation of children by their parents? To this crime we plead guilty. But you say we destroy the most hallowed of relations when we replace home education by social. And your education, is that not also social and determined by the social conditions under which you educate, by the intervention, direct or indirect, of society by means of schools, etc.? The communists have not invented the intervention of society in education. They do not but seek to alter the character of that intervention and to rescue education from the influence of the ruling class. The bourgeois claptrap about family and education, about the hallowed correlation of parents and child, become all the more disgusting, the more by the action of modern industry. All the family ties amongst the proletarians are torn asunder and their children transformed into simple articles of commerce and instruments of labor.
But
I'm looking for my place. We're on 146, right?
Yep.
I'll carry on, Dust, till you catch up. But you communists would introduce community of women, screams the bourgeoisie in chorus.
Okay. The bourgeois sees his wife as mere instrument of production. He hears that the instruments of production are to be exploited in common and naturally, can come to no other conclusion that the lot of being common to all will likewise fall to the woman. He has not even a suspicion that the real point aimed at is to do away with the status of women as mere instruments of production. For the rest, nothing is more ridiculous than the virtuous indignation of the bourgeois at the community of women which they pretend is to be openly and officially established by communists. The communists have no need to introduce community of women. It has existed almost from time immemorially.
Our bourgeois, not content with having wives and daughters of their proletarians at their disposal, not to speak of common prostitutes, take the great pleasure in seducing each other's wives. Bourgeois marriage is, in reality, a system of wives in common, and thus, at the most, what the communists might possibly be reproached with is that they desire to introduce its substitution for a hypocritically concealed and openly legalized community for women. I'll repeat that again. Substitution for a hypocritically concealed and openly legalized community of women. Sorry for my mistake. For the rest, it is self-evident that the abolition of the present system of production must bring with it the abolition of the community of women springing from the system, that is, prostitution both public and private. The communists are further reproached with desiring to abolish countries and nationality. The working men have no country. We cannot take from them what they have not got, since the proletariat must first of all acquire political supremacy, must rise to the leading class of the nation, must constitute itself the nation. It is so far itself national, though not in the bourgeois sense of the word. Oh, you're on mute, Helen.
National differences and antagonisms between people are daily more and more vanishing, owing to the development of the bourgeoisie, to freedom of commerce, to the world market, to uniformity in the mode of production and in the conditions of life corresponding thereto. The supremacy of the proletariat will cause them all to vanish still faster. United action of the leading civilized countries, at least, is one of the first conditions for the emancipation of the proletariat. In proportion as the exploitation of one individual by another will also be put to an end, the exploitation of one nation by another will also be put to an end. In proportion as the antagonisms between classes within the nation vanishes, the hostility of one nation to another will come to an end. The charges against communism made from a religious, a philosophical, and generally from an ideological standpoint are not deserving of serious examination. Does it require deep intuition to comprehend the man's ideas, views, and conception? In one word, man's consciousness changes with every change in the conditions of his material existence, in his social relations, and in his social life.
What else does the history of ideas prove than that intellectual production changes its character in proportion as material production is changed? The ruling ideas of each age have ever been the ideas of its ruling class. When people speak of the ideas that revolutionize society, they do but express that fact that within the old society, the elements of a new one have been created, and that dissolution of old ideas keeps even pace with the dissolution of old conditions of existence.
When the ancient world was in its last throes, the ancient religions were overcome by Christianity. When Christian ideas succumbed in the 18th century to rationalist ideas, feudal society fought its death battle with the then revolutionary bourgeoisie. The ideas of religious liberty and freedom of conscience merely gave expression to the sway of freedom of free competition within the domain of knowledge. Undoubtedly, it will be said, religious, moral, philosophical, and juridical ideas have been modified in the course of historical development. But religion, morality, philosophy, political science, and law constantly survive this change. There are, besides, eternal truths, such as freedom, justice, etc., that are common to all states of society. But communism abolishes eternal truths, it abolishes all religion and all morality instead of constituting them on a new basis. It therefore acts in contradiction to all past historical experience.
What does this accusation reduce itself to? The history of all past society has consisted in the development of class antagonisms that assume different forms at different epochs. But whatever form they may have taken, one fact is common to all past ages, viz., the exploitation of one part of society by the other. No wonder then that the social consciousness of past ages, despite all multiplicity and variety it displays, moves within certain common forms or general ideas, which cannot completely vanish except with the total disappearance of class antagonisms. The communist revolution is the most radical rupture with the traditional property relations. No wonder that its development involved the most radical rupture with traditional ideas. But let us have done with the bourgeois objections to communism. We have seen above that the first step in the revolution by the working class is to raise the proletariat to the position of the ruling class to win the battle of democracy.
The proletariat will use its political supremacy to wrest, by degree, all capital from the bourgeoisie, to centralize all instruments of production in the hands of the state, i.e., of the proletariat organized as the ruling class, to increase the total productive forces as rapidly as possible. Of course, in the beginning, this cannot be effected except by means of despotic inroads on the rights of property and on the conditions of bourgeois production, by means of measures, therefore, which appear economically insufficient and untenable, but which, in the course of the movement, outstrip themselves and necessitate further inroads upon the old social order, and are unavoidable as a means of entirely revolutionizing the mode of production.
These measures will, of course, be different in different countries. Nevertheless, in most advanced countries, the following will be pretty generally applicable. 1. Abolition of private property in land and application of all rents of land to public purposes. 2. A heavy progressive or graduated income tax. 3. Abolition of all rights of inheritance. 4. Confiscation of the property of all immigrants and rebels. 5. Centralisation of credit in the hands of the state by means of a national bank with state capital and an exclusive monopoly. 6. Centralisation of the means of communication and transport in the hands of the state. 7. Extension of factories and instruments of production owned by the state, the bringing into cultivation of wastelands and the improvement of the soil generally in accordance with the common plan. 8. Equally liability of all to work, the establishment of industrial arms, especially for agriculture. 9. Combination of agriculture with the manufacturing industries, gradual abolition of all distinction between town and country by more equitable distribution of the populace over the country. 10. Free education of all children in public schools, abolition of children's factory labour in its present form, combination of education with industrial production, etc., etc.
When in the course of development, class distinctions have disappeared and all production has been concentrated in the hands of a vast association of the whole nation, the public power will lose its political character. Political power, properly so called, is merely the organized power of one class for oppressing another. If the proletariat during its contest with the bourgeoisie is compelled by the force of circumstances to organize itself as a class, if by means of a revolution it makes itself the ruling class and as such sweeps away by force the old conditions of production, then it will, along with these conditions, have swept away the conditions for the existence of class antagonisms and of classes generally, and will thereby have abolished its own supremacy as a class. In place of the old bourgeois society with its classes and class antagonisms, we shall have an association in which the free development of each is the condition for the free development of all.
Mm. Wow. Well, that concludes our reading of the section. Maybe we can get into a bit of a discussion. My initial reaction is, wow, that was a short text, but there's so much positive information, like life-changing, revolutionary information, and just this short section. And I think what really stuck out to me was the basic idea of scientific socialism. A does not equal A. You do not step in the same river twice. And I think I read, if I could sum up the entire chapter, almost in one paragraph here, is on page 148, is what else does history of ideas prove? That intellectual production changes its character, proportion as material production is change. The ruling ideas of each age have ever been the ideas of its ruling class. So I mean, it's like, so liberalism is where ideas make history. Liberalism, there's one set of right and wrong, and if something is wrong, we got to get back to those basic set of right ideas, is false. I often argue with my dad. He's reading, he's been rereading the so-called founding fathers of the United States. And he says all the problems in the world that we have, the founding fathers talked about and warned about. And if only we would listen to their ideas, these great revolutionary men and heroes, we could correct our society. Well, he is wrong, because the conditions of back then that they were responding to are not the same conditions now. There's no one set of universal ideas that are the right way forward, and not even communists. It's not even and when I think in the beginning of this chapter is this bit of humility for communists. Communists aren't even the ones that are to make the ideas that we follow. Communists are to understand society, where it is going, and then push for the advancement of society and the advancement of the working class. And how we do that and how we implement that depends on the current conditions. That's my initial response. Comrade David, what's your initial response to reading the chapter?
Well, it's a matter of I've read this on numerous times, and I think it's got to be actually kept in context. It shows you what matter in motion. It shows you that, first of all, how society just didn't happen overnight like this where we are now. It touched on about feudal society, even going back to slave time. That's actually, and shows you how property, relations to property, how family has changed over the concept of time, etc., and even with education as well. And what was the interesting point we're coming about? The bourgeoisie, every government you've got around in their country, like say for Australia or the US, wherever, every policy that's put forth, everything that's legislated, even what's commented in the media, is the bourgeois class position. That's what it is, the capitalist class position. And it's nothing to do, it has no interest whatsoever into advancing the cause of the many other classes. It's there primarily to uphold and maintain profit. And that's what Marx was actually, Marx and Engels too, including him, were actually aiming at here. So it's quite interesting. And I know some comment about private property, family, etc. We'll go through that and we'll deal with that during the questions.
Helen, any initial response?
Oh, look, the thing that stood out for me, and like Dave, I've read this, a number of times, but each time you read it, you get more information from it. I love the bit again on page 148 as well. He says the charges against communism made from a religious, a philosophical, and generally from an ideological standpoint are not deserving of a serious examination. And I think that's fantastic. Like they don't, and Dave, you were alluding to this as well, is that what they say is protecting their class position in the society. So the religious man, the priests and so on, they are protecting their position in the society. And the philosophers, they also are they're protecting the ideas of capitalist society. In some parts of Europe, to get into a philosophy degree in university, it requires a score of 99%. You have to be, the most, let's say, intelligent person to get into that course. The reason being, and I don't know if it's the same now, this was just something I heard, years ago, but the reason being is that you will become part of spreading the ideology of the bourgeoisie. You will be part of the think tanks that go ahead and manipulate our ideas and manipulate the way we think about this society. And the philosophy behind it will be determining what's important for us to think about. So it might be gender politics, or it might be, something else that will be very important. But will it really be important? No. And that's what Marx is saying. Those ideas are not important. The idea is that the most important concept that we need to grapple with is the fact that we are, for one, that they spread their lies and manipulate us for their benefit. And the idea that we have to get around is that we need to take control and manipulate the idea, not manipulate, but, change the ideas and the fundamental ideology of society to do away with the class antagonisms.
Let's see. Before we get into the questions, I just want to make a small note that the science is continually evolving. The science evolves with the changing conditions, and this was in Marx. In the beginning of Marxism, was were written, at the beginning of the bourgeois revolution, and it hadn't yet expanded into the era that Lenin said was imperialism. So in there, he talks about, nations, but he doesn't really get into, respecting of oppressed nations, and even that Lenin would said, Lenin would support, Lenin would support a feudal monarch in Afghanistan if they were against the British imperialists, which is a little bit different from what's said here. But I mean, that's scientific socialism. We're not. This is not scripture. It's evolving, it's changing, and we have to go with that. Let's see. Any other thing before we start the questions, David?
Well, I think we'll address about that the nation. I mean, look, about the same. We actually do not own our nations as such. It's the multinationals that own and control our nations. They're the ones who run. The governments are there as an executive power to legislate and enforce private profit motive through the major multinationals. When we use the term imperialism, this is the era we're in now. It's global free trade, the whole lot. All the wealth has been concentrated into fewer hands. Well, it's those fewer hands that require all the governments to put the legislation into and make sure that there's free flowing capital everywhere to extract more profit. And that's what it comes down to. And I know someone here made the comments in the comments section here. The fact is, we do not have a say in the direction of our company. We may go to a ballot box every 4 or 3 years, tick the box whoever we want, or maybe not at all. But the fact is, at the end of the day, we do not have that great input. We could put submissions into government. We can try and do this, and yeah, we may get some little changes or some quick, mild reforms and that. But really, at the end of the day, the fact is, at the end of the day, we do not have the say in the direction of the country. I mean, we'd be in a completely different situation now. We'd have a completely different conversation if that was the case, if we had so. And I heard that. And I mean, I know the first question, what does Marx mean by private property? And for all of everyone who listens to this, I think they've got to keep this in context. What Marx meant, it's not your personal home. Didn't mean your car, didn't mean the clothes on your body, didn't mean your television or any personal items you either have and you've worked hard for. What he meant was basically the means of production. Okay, the large factories, the banks, everything that's been acquired by the capitalists to make profit, and that's what they were talking about. A classic example here in Australia: our natural resources, our mines and resources, oil and gas. The fact is, why isn't it in public hands anymore? And that really, by rights, the private ownership should be abolished. It should be back into public hands, and that wealth that's generated, the money comes back into the for the benefit of the public, not for the benefit of Twiggy Forrest or Gina Reinhardt or BHP, Rio Tinto, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. And that's just one classic example. And that's what I believe what Marx meant by that. And that's what pretty much was confirmed to me by many other. But when I first read private property, well, initially I thought, what? If I made a little house and that, it's not much to abolish. And for Luke's sake, look, no, mate, we're not going to go around, crash around, take over your house, take over your fridge, invite everyone around, have it, and also to get stuck into all your beer and that as well. So, no, that's not going to happen. All right, your house is your house. That's your home. We're not interested in taking that. Although, if you've got a fridge full of beer, I'll be interested in that.
Let's see. Helen, maybe you could continue any response to what's said so far and go on to the next question as well.
Well, on this whole issue of private property, it's very interesting, and it is the bourgeois, it's the capitalist class screaming about how dare we want to take what they consider their private property. It's not their private property. They stole it. They stole it from either the indigenous people that were on the land prior, but they steal those natural resources that belong to the entire wealth of the nation and keep it for themselves. So of course, they're screaming about doing away with private property. But, we only need to look also at the other side of it, is that they're pricing the private property out of our ability to buy it anyway. Houses here in Melbourne are $1 million. What worker can afford a home at $1 million? There might be a few, but there's not many. And all of the new generation or the young generation, they know that they cannot afford a house. So is it the communists that are screaming about doing away with private property? No, it's already been done away with. People can't afford to buy these things. We think because we go out and buy some piece of junk that somehow that gives us private property. That's not the private property we're talking about. Keep your junk. Keep our simple material possessions. They're ours. Marx never said that he wanted to do away with personal private property. What he wants to do away with is, and really historically what he's talking about is not, it's not something he personally wants to do away with. He says this is how that capitalism is unsustainable, that it's going to develop, it has to develop in this direction anyway. It's a natural progression. So, but this argument about private property is just, this is the bourgeois ideology coming through to defend their position. And I think that's the same also in this question of the family, which is question 2. What does Marx say about the family? Well, he's already explained in there that, and if you go to any socialist country, what part of a socialist country has ever said that they want to abolish the family? In fact, the family is protected. Children are protected. Venezuela's just put, in 1999, they put out a new constitution, and one of the bits in the constitution was the protection of children, and they said, and the protection of the family. So there is no socialist society that has ever said that they will abolish the family. What Marx is talking about is that the abolition of the family has actually come about because of capitalism. And anyway, what he's saying is that what is our family unit? Generally speaking, it's been based on the exploitation of children. So we want to do away with that. We want to make sure that our children go to school. We want to make sure that they are part of society and that when they walk out of school, they can be productive members of society. What have we got now? Do we have productive members of society? We have 29-year-olds that are still working at McDonald's as fast food operators because on a minimum wage because they cannot, and they've got university degrees, because they cannot function as adults under capitalism, because capitalism cannot fulfill the needs of people. It's the most ridiculous concept to think that socialism wants to do away with the family. It is ridiculous. Sorry, I get a bit heated about this subject because, defense of the family is something, the Soviet Union in its day had free education, free after-school activities. The children in summer holidays went away and they stayed at camps that provided for their every need. And at the same time, and in Cuba, the children go and work at the same time on their holidays. So they're participating in society. They're learning what it means to be a productive member of society and what other people go through and what their conditions of life are like. So that when they go back to the cities or, they don't have the huge divide between the country and the cities. The city kids know what the country kids deal with. And this is, it's just the most ridiculous thing.
Can I just add on to it? It was just interesting because when it's our camps, I mean, we used to do that a lot when I was a young boy. I was in the Cubs, dib, dob, dob, and all that. And we used to go away. But also, there was also various groups. You had school camps, a whole lot. And the idea was you can learn practical skills, but also get to appreciate nature and, and there's some good knowledge as part of learning. But also, at the same time, it was a social thing as well. To actually keep you, basically not sitting around idling or trying to get up to mischief. And that's what that comes about. And I think what Marx say about the family, what they meant, the family has never been the mum, dad, and the 2.1 kids. The traditional nuclear family, as we've noticed it, as we've known it for many years. In feudal times, the family structure was completely different. It wasn't mum, dad, and the 2.1 kids. Probably many kids, but you actually had the uncles there. You had the grandparents, the elders as well, and everyone lived in the one village at the time. Probably tilled the same land together. The kids, when the kids were old enough, they came out in the fields with the men to do shepherding or and everyone was involved in the harvest and all that. So that was the family structure was bigger. in slave times, it was a completely different idea. You're it's the ownership of the property of your master, and then under pre-slave conditions, be it what indigenous when we lived in, like for example, in hunter and gatherer style families, it was completely different then. So the whole family structure. In fact, what's happened under current imperialism now, the family structure's been destroyed literally by a lot of everything from the it's basically primarily economic, but also all the social ills that go with it. And seeing what's happened, and I don't have to go off on a tangent here, but we've seen the complete destruction of the families here as well. So, under a socialist society, that would actually, the family would be what structure would be protected. How it would look like under that, I don't know. But can't predict what it would look like here for Australia. But I mean, reality is, at the end of the day, the mum and dad and 2.1 kids, and dad being the breadwinner, that's all gone out the window now. So so capitalism basically destroyed that as well. But what Marx been about the family, it's never been static. It's never been permanently like this. It's always been completely different through the ages of human history. Sorry, Dustin, I didn't jump in there.
That's fine. No, I think you've covered a lot of stuff I was going to get at. I mean, a lot of the people who say that socialists are trying to destroy the family and stuff. I mean, a lot of them are very deeply religious, and if you go back and you read about the kings and the prophets, a lot of them had like 100 wives and all kinds of stuff. And it's like, well, okay. I mean, at the time, enslaved society, and they had they had this one brutal ruler who owned all this people and land and things. That was the economic society, and religion, backed that up. And then and then in the feudal era, religion was what kept the feudal era intact. And then that changed under feudalism. I mean, that changed under capitalism. And there's a lot of right-wing criticism, right-wing meaning from feudalist traditions, criticisms of capitalism that communists would also hold. Because, under feudalism, where a family unit or maybe an extended family would live on the lord's land and till it, and then give their part of the majority of their produce to the king. They had to keep that unit together. But then when capitalism came about, we're the proletarian workers. We can be moved around. We can be separated. Child labor at the time. I think one of the worst things about today and the era of imperialism is forced migration, where people can't survive, in countries like Mexico or South America or Central and South America, because capitalism and the imperial system, monopoly capitalism, has made it so they cannot survive in their countries. And then they're forced to take on, horrible journeys, and face death or starvation or rape or slavery, because of the dominance of finance capital, monopoly capital. And then, and then people are forced to work for decades with little or no rights here to send back money home to survive. I mean, that is not, that's not protection of the family. And I'll go ahead and go on to the next question: is what is Marx's response to the claim that communism abolishes all eternal truths? And I think Marx was saying, no, it doesn't. Like, I mean, there's things like the laws of gravity, by Newton, that, largely don't change. I mean, you got different mass sizes and all kinds of other stuff. But I mean, the family unit, the family structure is not a natural and law that has to be the same way forever. And I think, as communists want to develop society, advance society for the interests of the workers, and whatever family structure is most beneficial to the working class is the structure that we will have.
Hmm.
And that still might be, a mom, dad, and children in a household, or it might be summer camps, it might be socialist education, socialist childcare, it could be these apartment units, it could be it could be it could be variety of things. It can be different in different regions depending on the industry and the conditions that people have. And I think a lot of what passes for eternal truths are just things the ruling class impose to maintain their order. And we see a development, on the issue of gender. To maintain capitalism, they would say that a woman's role is in the house, and so on and so forth, and you can't be gay, you can't be lesbian. We need this production unit of the one worker family with the stay-at-home mom, and that's what was best for capitalism at the time. And now that is no longer what's best for capitalism. They started introducing women into the workplace in greater numbers, in the 1970s in this country, and as a way to drive down wages. I mean, it changes, and now gay marriage is more acceptable. That's an advancement. That's positive. But it all goes back to what does the ruling class need and desire, and whatever benefits and continues their profits. And then when we take power, and then our need is to raise people out of poverty and to advance, civilization, we're going to have new structures that are better than what we have now, and we can't even see it or imagine it because we don't live in that world today. Let's see, Helen, any response to that?
Yeah, no, I would agree. I would agree with you, Dust. That the main thing about what they call eternal truths is there are things that subjugate and oppress workers. Their eternal truths are things that hold us back and keep us in our place, and that men are stronger than women, and that the list just goes on, and I think you've covered it brilliantly. But of course, scientific universal truths are universal truths. They're based on truth. Eternal truths, there is the suggestion that it's always been a truth, and that's not the case, because, as you say, Dust, things change and truths become different over time, and even scientific discoveries change. So nothing is an eternal truth, and and so for communists, the bourgeoisie would like things to stay the same constantly. What they're really talking about is their profits to stay the same, because their eternal truth change, their means of extracting profit changes, but that's not an eternal truth. But somehow keeping us oppressed is an eternal truth.
Yeah, that's right.
Comrade Fox, if you want to respond and also continue the next questions.
Yeah, I'll get on the next one. But I was just saying, it's like during feudal times, it was the divine right of the king, ordained by God to rule, and you never questioned it. And the fact is, at the end of the day, we all knew where that came to an end. That was not an internal truth, and no, it wasn't a truth at all. He wasn't ordained by anyone, but by someone else in all this fancy clothing to rule over it. And then consequently, part of that was all one thing to abolish that absolute monarchy as well, divine right to rule. All these things. It's like, and the other one where you've turned, I just want to bring up modern day, the eternal truth. When people say, well, it's always been like this. Wrong again. It hasn't never been like this. And example, going back to what one previous commentator said about abolishing the nation, Australia only came into being on the 1st of January 1901 as a federated group of colonies. That's what happened under the British Privy Council. That's happened, and we became a federation known as the Commonwealth of Australia. And while certain powers were handed over to a federal government, such as customs, foreign affairs, military, etc., and states had certain powers as well. And we're seeing the end result now. Did it work back then? Probably not as weak, but I mean now it's a catastrophe. I won't get down to it, but it's never been like this. Australia was not called Australia prior to that that date. And prior to the colonies, the country was the land was completely different prior to any settlement. So to say it's always been like this, wrong again. It never has been. I mean, I'm going to say something that probably, annoy some people making comments here, but the US didn't only come into being only since the 1700s. It never existed before then. Well before Europeans came along then. It never existed before then. So, no, it hasn't ever been like this always. So, we're in a constant state of change. And what Marx meant is what dialectical historical materialism, Marx's philosophy is all about. Everything is in a constant state of change. Nothing is static. Nothing is permanent. A does not equal A. And that's what he was referring to. Now, the question is, how is communism different than previous revolutions? And I think actually there was something going back to chapter here. I was just having a look. Here we go. It's on page 142. He goes, and this is where A does not equal A. He goes, all property relations in the past have continually been subject to historical change consequent upon the change in historical conditions. Hence why there's no only eternal truth. That's why everything's in a constant state of change. Because the French Revolution, for example, abolished feudal property in favour of bourgeois property. The distinguishing feature of communism is not the abolition of property generally, but the abolition of bourgeois property. And this sort of answers what we were talking about in the past. What's bourgeois property? The ownership of the private ownership of the means of production. Under imperialism now, it's the multinationals that want it. They want to make the rest of the world poor while all that wealth is extracted into fewer and fewer hands. That's what we're seeing. And of course, we want to abolish that. But modern bourgeois private property is the final and most complete expression of the system producing and appropriating products is based on class antagonisms and exploitation of many by the few. So that's what it means. So when the bourgeois came into power, or the capitalists came into power during the 1700s and 1800s, they abolished the old feudal relations, but replaced it with the new class antagonisms, right? Which means worker and boss, capitalist and proletariat, if you want to put, between the capitalists and workers. And that's what the two classes that primarily came into being. And with the communist one, well, that abolishes that bourgeois relation. That abolishes that relations. The workers are in working class, working people, the working families are now in control of society, and they are able to set its structure up. It changes things considerably. That's the whole complete difference. We have no between two hostile classes anymore, and that's where that moves on. So, that's what I looked at it. What it meant by then, and what it meant by. Sorry, I'll repeat that. How it meant by that question. How is communism different than the previous revolutions? Because that's just the final level. I mean, there's no other after that. Once the workers and poor people coming to being and take power. That'd be the final struggle. So that's what I think Billy Marx meant by that.
Mm-hmm. Yes, I mean the previous revolutions brought different modes of production. Right? The hunter-gatherers, slave societies, feudalism, capitalism, and then socialism, and eventually communism. I think the difference between socialism and capitalism is that instead of having a few owners of the means of production, the state will control those resources, and the people will control the state and then use those for the benefit of the common good. There's a really good quote that's been going around. If I can remember where it was. Oh, you got me all the way back here. Oh, here it is. The proletariat will use its political supremacy to wrest by degree which is interesting. By degree means it means doing what, versions. I mean, in the Soviet Union there was markets, but it was, it has less markets than some of the socialist countries today, like Vietnam or China. But that by degree is very important. It doesn't have to happen all at once. But what does have to happen is the proletariat has to take power from the bourgeoisie. So the workers have to be power. And how do you get that? How do you get that power? You need, mass organizations. I mean, it was the Soviets in the Soviet Union, which were workers' councils. And now you have the over 90 million member Communist Party in China. And I believe you have, Defense of the Revolution in Cuba, little neighborhood associations that came out when this whole Bay of Tweets came down, where U.S. media was manipulating, some of the people that are the worst off in Cuba, as a direct result of U.S. actions. The embargo manipulated them to go out against, their own interests, and then the defense of the revolution brigades came out in mass immediately after that. I mean, you didn't see it on the media, but I mean, they're firmly in power. They stay in power because their power is rooted in the people. This is why, the Black Panthers and why I say all power to the people at the end of all my videos. And I can continue that quote. The proletariat will use its political supremacy to wrest by degree all capital from the bourgeoisie, to centralize all instruments of production in the hands of the state, i.e. the proletariat organized as the ruling class. And that organization can take on many forms, as I just described. And here's the big part that, a lot of people don't get, especially now when the bourgeoisie is trying to do this degrowth. The monopoly capitalists who control oil companies, who created global warming, are now telling us that, the oppressed countries and workers, they're not allowed to use oil and other resources that they got rich off for hundreds of years and have destroyed our planet with. And now we all have to degrow and become poor. Basically, I call it green austerity against the working class, austerity against the oppressed nations. I mean, this was very apparent with the recent Yellow Vest movement in France, when it was the working class who was against a gasoline tax. But to increase the total productive forces as rapidly as possible. And why would they want to increase the productive forces as rapidly as possible? Because communism requires superabundance. And what is the first thing all socialist governments do? Cuba sent children out to the countryside to teach people how to read. China has massive anti-poverty campaigns, has lifted over 900 million people out of poverty. That's what we're going to do. So if we as a working class, through these mass organizations, take state power in the United States, and we nationalize our resources, we take on the heights of industry, and we organize in the way, and we're going to have goals, 5-year plans, like the Soviet Union. And the first thing we're going to do is we're going to go to Appalachia, and we're going to build houses, and we're going to build schools, and we're going to go to the Delta region, and in the Black Belt South, where half of the adult population is illiterate to this day, and the biggest imperialist country in the world. And we're going to teach people how to read. We're going to give them schools. We're going to elevate the conditions and make them full members of society, so they can give even more to the society, and we continue to advance. It's this upward spiral. Sorry, I went on to a tangent there. let's see, Comrade Helen, if you want to respond to that and maybe take the next question.
You're on mute.
Sorry, I thought I hit it. The only thing that I would say in response to this question as well is that we have to realize that workers have been involved in every single revolution that's existed, that's come into being over the course of human history. So it's not like our participation in a socialist revolution would be historically alien to us. We were used in campaigns to do away with the old order to bring in a new order. And from slavery, there have been wars against slavery. There were, in the development of capitalism, there were bourgeois revolutions where workers were killed, and under the promise that we would have representation for all. So we have participated in every single revolution historically for a change in society. The only thing that's different about this change in society, as has already been mentioned, is that we will be doing it for ourselves. We will be wresting political power for ourselves. So don't be thinking that somehow workers, that your historical position in society has been to sit by and watch conditions change in society. As a working class member, historically, we have been involved in every single transition, every single revolution, and now it's time to take our place in society and revolt for ourselves so we can wrest political power. So the next question is, did Marx believe in state power? And to kick off that, absolutely. Marx believes in state power. It's the same condition as believing in political power. The state power is the same as us wresting political power. How do we defend that political power once we've got it? We have to have state power. And without that state power, we will lose that revolution. And that's, we've seen historical cases where that has been the case. Allende in Chile, he did not arm the workers. He did not wrest the political power from, the state power from the military. And as a result, what then occurred was a coup. Allende was shot, and fascist dictatorship of Pinochet came into being for 30 years or so. And now they're just resting with that whole concept of a new democratic system, and they'll have issues with that and so on. But without wresting that political power, taking away the state power from the military, who again are part of the state setup. They're part of, so we've got three arms. We've got the courts, we've got the military, and we've got the political power. All of those things, they all work together to defend capitalism, and we cannot just take control of one section of those arms. We have to take control of all of them. So absolutely, Marx believed in state power. What he does talk about later is that, and he mentions it here right at the very end on page 150. He talks about the fact that we can evolve out of that once we sweep away by force the old conditions of production. Then it will, along with these conditions, have swept away the conditions for the existence of class antagonisms and of classes generally, and will thereby have abolished its own supremacy as a class. So once we abolish our own supremacy as a class, we no longer need to have a state. We no longer need to have military. We no longer need to have courts enforcing the domination of one class over another. Yep. So then the state will wither away, and we won't need to have those structures in place.
Yeah. And just on that, I mean, yeah, I mean, you've obviously covered it, and it actually states here on page 149, I think it's 2, 3, 4, fifth paragraph down, the proletariat will use its political supremacy to wrest, by degree, all capital from the bourgeoisie, to centralize all instruments of production hands of the state. That is, the proletariat organized as the ruling class, and to increase the total productive forces as rapidly as possible. And it was pretty much a quick summary of what he meant there. It's basically what we've done. We've had all the major banks, the major industries, the mineral resources, the mines, etc., and other factories, and that all organised around a centrally coordinated plan where profit is no longer in command. And that's what it is. And when we meant by profit is no longer command, that means the imperialists, the bourgeoisie, that are no longer in command. It's the working class that's in command. And we're going to get, we all know the industries that around our central plan to rebuild. Yep.
Let's see. I think a big reason why this question was included in this text is because, this whole trend on bread tube and a lot of the petty bourgeois middle class left, predominantly in imperialist countries, have been, infected by liberalism and their class position, and are being made ineffective purposely, and are being back. And then we got the State Department and other agencies who are backing their them being ineffective and promoting their work, that we don't need the state. That, the ideas of Marx are great. Like this is okay. They can promote Marx's ideas, but then when Marx's ideas have teeth and are state, then they're horrible. And then, it's kind of like liberalism. It's like this universal truth. Like if it's kind of like this whole like anarchist thing. Whenever an anarchist sees a protester, whether it is, somebody down in Alabama trying to fight against, the suppression of the union movement, who maybe takes the street and does a demonstration, is the same as, a rich child of a capitalist in Hong Kong, who wants their father to be able to go into mainland China, break environmental laws, and destroy the environment of the Chinese people. That protester is the same as, the community around, workers. It's ridiculous. It's liberalism. It's this whole like universal truth things. Proletariat needs power. We have to build mass organizations. We have to take that power, implement that power. And I'm a big fan of democratic centralism, is where those mass organizations influence a central body, and that central body makes a decision and carries out that decision in military precision. And not all of those actions are always, it's not always going to be the correct. Socialist governments make mistakes. It's not always going to be the most correct action. And sometimes there's harsh action that's necessary. If somebody breaks in your home and is going to kill you and your family, sometimes you have to take the necessary action of stopping them by many means necessary, including force, including deadly force. And that is exactly what a socialist government will do against the agents that wish to destroy the well-being and the peace and the prosperity of the people. Let's see. Is it my turn to take the question?
Yep.
Okay, so I'll go on to the next question.
Helen, you're on mute again.
I keep hitting the button and
You're on mute.
I'm unmuted. Am I?
Yep.
Yeah, you're muted.
I just wanted to point out about this whole issue of the state, is that also when we rebel against, when we say that we don't need a state, and that we're creating an anarchist society, or that the state is always going to be a bad thing, then we're also then saying that chaos is going to reign, and that makes it very hard for us to build a new society, because without a state, without a functioning body to organize us, we become vandals. We, you know, those that would want for there not to be a state is trying to create chaos, destruction. And whereas we're city builders, we want to build things. We want to create a better society. How do we do that? As you said, Dust, through organisation and through a state that represents the workers.
Yep.
So I'll go on to the next question. Why have some of the 10 planks listed by Marx been created in capitalist societies? So he's I think, let's see. It's these 10 things right here, right?
Yeah.
So I think the biggest one is the abolition of child's factory labor, and that's very barbaric. I think there is still child labor in oppressed countries, but they have done away with it in the imperialist countries because they need workers within the imperialist countries not to revolt against the system. So you get what's developed, a labor aristocracy, and it's dwindling now as imperialism is becoming is lashing out and becoming weaker as the U.S. falls, and they had all these social democrat programs. They're getting rid of education. They're getting rid of these things. So I mean, it's complicated. That's one example. Let's see. I think, David, you can do the last question. Maybe Helen, if you want, just respond to that question before David goes on.
I think a lot of the conditions, the fantastic conditions that workers in imperialist countries have, and Australia is a classic. We've just got we did have amazing kind of social welfare and programs and so on, but it was on the back of the revolution in the Soviet Union. So the capitalists around the world were extremely concerned that the Soviet Union was showing the way forward, and all of these fantastic things that could be achieved under socialism. The first things they did was free schools, free hospitals, free this, free, just amazing stuff. And, at the same time, they put people in space. They put a woman in space, just undermined the whole idea that capitalism was somehow this the system, that the only system that we could live under, and that capitalism was the best system, that we could live under. And all of a sudden you've got the Soviet Union showing all of these amazing ways that humanity was developing. And so, of course, the capitalist and the imperialist countries in the developed world were extremely concerned about that influence. And then, coming out of World War II and so on, they needed to ensure, as you said, Dust, that the workers weren't going in their own countries weren't going to rebel. So all of these social welfare measures and all of these fantastic gains were handed out, but not without struggle, of course. But certainly put in place so that it would dampen the effect of what was occurring around the world in China and the Soviet Union, but principally the Soviet Union at that time.
And just to finalise it, once again, it shows you where A does not equal A. There's this matter in motion. The standards of living we've enjoyed here in Australia since, just after World War II, not just straight after, but like from the 50s onwards, the very high standard of living that we seem to enjoy and took for granted and everything else wasn't there before World War II, interesting enough. When people made a joke, well, when I went to school with no shoes on, and that was actually right. A lot of people lived in dire poverty. The inner city of Sydney, Melbourne, and that, they were dumps, they were slums. They were rested, damp and cold and damp in winter, hot, stinking hot in summer. Sanitation wasn't much there. So, I mean, all that area leading up to it, there was some good parts about it, good moments in history, but I mean, and some gains, there were some conditions gained, but reality is, in the end of the day, the high standard that we took for granted for many years here in Australia didn't come into being just like they'd been with us since, for thousands of years. This has only happened just as a recent phenomenon. So it just, once again, it was proved correct that A does not equal A. So the last question goes, what does Marx mean in the final section when he speaks of free development? And I think it's something when he gets, yes, where it says, in which the free development of each is the condition for the free development of all. And I actually didn't take too much thought about that until sometime later on, not today, but I was having it there. How would that work? And I said, yeah, well, under socialism, where we produce so much that actually, even for the individual, there's our ability to advance further, selves for themselves, to enrich their lives, to become much more to pursue cultural activities, but be out in the benefit of all society as well. So it's not every man for himself, stuff you, Jack, I'm okay. It won't be like that at all. It actually is there that in socialism you can actually able to achieve. Someone, I'll give you an example. Someone who's able to push the broom on a workshop floor will make a brilliant senior mechanical engineer. You know what I mean? It's someone who is, originally would have been dirt poor and that, or, just trying to scrape by in life under capitalism and imperialism would make a fantastic general surgeon. You know what I mean? The ability for people to advance and further, there wouldn't be any of these bourgeois obstacles in place where you'd have to have a lot of money to get a university degree. You'd have all the systems in place and allowing you to advance in society. If you wish to be just a general labourer, that's fine. That's fine. And you'd still be able to contribute and everything else in your own way. But it also allows all those people that really wanted to do something. They want to be a doctor, an engineer, a scientist, or something else, they would like to do. Even like if they want to be in the entertainment sector, they want to actually pursue their career in music or entertainment or acting, or the ability to actually do so would be a lot easier for them to do so, and it would benefit society as well. So it's not like they're trying to take everything like a capitalist does and more way and just extract all that wealth into fewer and fewer hands. This would all be now we'd be enjoying all the cultural pursuits and all those benefits society as a whole. So if someone really wants to be a general surgeon, would make a fantastic general surgeon and would benefit all of us if it made sense there.
Powerful. We got about 7 minutes. I said we go about an hour and a half. I think that's a beautiful thing to end it on. Maybe we could do a round of closing statements and end it up. Helen, any response to that or any closing statements as well?
I think also this issue of development of one for the development and the development of all also helps us to understand that we are individuals within our society, and our needs as individuals need to be met. And when society can meet our needs as an individual, then you are meeting the needs of your society. And I think that's important. I think sometimes, as communists, we might forget that we are individuals within a society, and our independent and our individual needs are very, very important. They make us who we are. And what socialism wants to do, what communism wants to do, is allow you and me to be the best people that we can possibly be. And communism will allow that. And when we when we have our individual development to the best that it can be, then we are doing then that is also the best thing that we can be doing for society as well, because fulfilled individuals are going to make up a much better society than unhappy, unfulfilled, unable to participate in society. That is not going to be a good, healthy society. So I think there's those two kind of forces that we also need to keep constantly in the back of our minds. And I want to just say how also, as a closing statement, Caleb talks in this book about the aesthetics of our movement and how the bourgeoisie can take our things away from us and make it seem like it's theirs, and change the whole concept of an ideology or whole concept of an idea, and they make it their own. And Prince William came out just recently talking about a royal 5-year plan. Now he's taken the idea of a Marx, a socialist idea of a planned economy, of a 5-year plan, and he's now using that terminology. It's the most, you know, they do that so that they confuse things. So when they talk about democracy, they confuse what actually is democracy. Their democracy is different from our democracy. And what happens to us is that we stop using our words. We stop using those things because somehow they become, the bourgeoisie is using them. So we go, oh, we can't do that. We can't use that concept anymore. We can't use that idea because it sounds bad. It sounds bourgeois. It sounds middle class. It sounds wrong. But actually what's happened is we should be using those words. We should be taking them back and using them as our words and transforming back into the powerful meanings that they are, and not let them take those things away from us. They're ours. They belong to us. We need to own them again.
Powerful. I mean, I'll break it down in how I get this concept in simple language. If I didn't have to work 70 hours a week or before 100 hours a week, or all these folks out in the fields, folks in the chicken plants, you know, folks building the roads, we didn't have to work all these hours and then have just enough time to go and get ourselves straight, get enough sleep, get enough rest, and then go back and do that so that our labor, the fruits of our labor, can be stolen by this small group of bankers and continue to do that. And then they use that and they use that money instead of investing it back. They use that money to do all these wars and fund all these wars to stop, you know, oppressed countries from developing. And you think about they are holding back history. They want Afghanistan to stay in chaos and in ruin. If they're not going to do it by outright military presidents anymore, they're going to do it with the CIA, and they're going to do it with contractors, and they're going to keep Afghanistan in poverty and chaos. And they're holding back the development of all those people right here in the United States, and there in Australia, and the imperialist countries, and especially in the oppressed nations, and those right at the boot of war, and all these terrorist, right-wing terrorist organization backed by the United States for the sole purpose of stopping development of that country to maintain profits, super profits. So, I mean, and then socialism will allow us to develop to our full selves. That money that they steal from us to go to these wars to stop other people from developing can go to schools, hospitals, can go to us having more free time, can go to a number of things where we can advance ourselves, make ourselves better people, and then give back even greater to our society. And it also, if you look at the Center for Political Innovations plan, the Centino Zapata economic corridor, which is we want economic development in Mexico and Central America, because those people have been kept down by U.S.-backed drug cartels with U.S. weapons, and then U.S. partners, banks, keeping those countries poor and dependent so they can super exploit them, take their resources, and left in these horrible conditions. If they were allowed, and then forced here, because they can't survive, forced across this border. We had economic development in Central America, which is being spearheaded now by AMLO, a social democrat of an oppressed country, and socialist countries like Nicaragua. They got this really beautiful thing called, in Nicaragua, called, I think it's Grow Where You're Planted. And that got into another thing in this book that I really like, which is the rural-urban divide of capitalism. And everybody knows I'm a big country music fan. And a reason why country music really began to exist was because in the late 1950s, 1960s, going into the 70s, and the U.S. had a larger rural population. And then as the needs of capitalism change, becomes more industrialized, all these people could no longer, and automation of farm machinery, they can no longer survive in rural areas. And they were forced and pushed into urban areas. And people missed, the simple elements of country life. So it was kind of like this glorification of, of country life, even though it was horrible, even though but I made this video called China is Making Country Music's Dream a Reality, which is essentially that China has been reinvesting in the countryside to make, to try to get rid of this urban-rural divide and make, living in rural areas, have people in rural areas develop and be a part of the economy. And that's essentially the dream of romanticization of old country life is now being progressed. They're doing it in the socialist countries. They're doing it in China. They're doing it in Nicaragua. And so we can rural, urban, can develop to our full selves, stop what's being stolen from us, invest back into our society, and have a better future. I mean, I get tired of people, oh, you're an anti-American commie who wants to strike down and destroy everything. And I'm not the one doing destroying. I want things to get better. I want life for my family to get better. I want life for my community to get better. I want life for folks around me in the rural area to get better. And socialism is the only thing that can do that. Let's see, Comrade Fox, any closing statement?
Well, I think actually you hit that on the head, and that's why we do it. We actually want life to be better for everybody, and that's for our respecting country. When there's a comment before that saying we want to destroy this and abolish that, I mean, no, well, it wasn't about that at all. We actually want to change society that benefits everybody, because here in Australia, not everyone's benefiting anymore. COVID-19 certainly has exposed that. I mean, New South Wales is catastrophe at the moment. 466 cases yesterday, and the system's on the point of breaking up there. And I mean, it was a socialism, it would be a complete different scenario what it is, and everyone would be benefiting as well. But no, out of all this, no one will be. And when we see the other side of it, the situation in Australia is going to be a lot more dire for everyone here than it was previously. And the fact is, one of the questions where anyone that does watch this, especially here in Australia, have we actually really benefited at all under imperialism? No. And when you think about it, how come we've less large-scale industries? How come we've seen standards of livings, drop? Large-scale industries go overseas. How come we've got all this mineral wealth being concentrated in fewer hands? How come houses are much more expensive when they should have been? And now we've got generations can't afford it. Do you really think we're better under this system? I don't think so. And that's why we're doing what we're doing, so we can actually advance society forward to make it a much more peaceful, much more stable, and a society that benefits everybody and for future generations as well, not just for me personally.
See, we're about to do our chant. Any further comments? Okay, Helen?
No, I think that's fantastic.
All right, so we're going to end it. We're going to do our chant. Everybody wants to raise their fist and repeat after me. Dare to struggle.
Dare to struggle.
Dare to struggle.
Dare to win.
Dare to win.
Dare to win.
All power to the people.
All power
to the people.
All right. Thank you.
Good night. Thank you.
Good night.